Single dad rescued a shocking billionaire, then left without a word. The SUV hit the utility pole at exactly 5:18 a.m. Steel screamed against wood. A transformer exploded in a shower of brilliant green sparks. Power lines, thick as snakes, slapped against the wet asphalt, hissing and spitting arcs of blue electricity that skittered across the puddles like living things. Liam Reed slammed the brakes on his beat-up Ford F-150, the truck skidding to a halt 100 feet from the chaos. Inside the mangled black vehicle, a woman was pinned, her silhouette barely visible against the strobing, dangerous light. Liam didn't hesitate. He turned to his 7-year-old daughter in the passenger seat. "Maya, lock the doors. Do not get out. Do not even open the window. Do you understand?" Her eyes were wide, fixed on the deadly fireworks in the street, but she nodded, a small, jerky motion. He pulled on the thick, oil-stained leather jacket he kept on the passenger seat, then reached into the glove box for its matching work gloves. They were old, worn smooth in some places and scarred in others, a second skin he'd worn for 1,000 repairs. He moved with the careful, deliberate pace of a man who understood danger. The air crackled, smelling of ozone and burnt rubber. He gave the downed wires a wide berth, his boots splashing in the rain-slicked street. The driver's side door was crushed, jammed tight. Through the shattered window, he saw her. She was conscious, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror as a tendril of blue light spat and sizzled, creeping closer to the growing pool of gasoline under the engine. "Stay calm," he shouted over the hum. "I'm going to get you out." He wedged his shoulder against the frame, grunting with effort, the metal groaning in protest. It wouldn't budge. He braced himself, found a new angle, and threw his entire weight into it. Metal shrieked. The door popped open a foot. It was enough. He reached inside, his gloved hands carefully avoiding the twisted metal. "My ankle," she gasped, her voice thin. "It stuck." He saw it then, her foot pinned beneath the crumpled dashboard. Working quickly, shielding her body with his own as another shower of sparks rained down, he braced the dash with one hand and worked her leg free with the other. He lifted her from the seat, her arms slinging weakly around his neck. He wrapped his leather jacket around her, a shield against the spitting rain and the terrifying light, and carried her away from the wreckage, back toward the safety of his truck. The wail of sirens grew in the distance. He placed her gently on the roadside verge, a safe distance away, as the first ambulance crested the hill. He waited just long enough to see the paramedics take over, to know she was in capable hands. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back to his truck, slipping away into the pale, wet dawn. He left no name, no number, no trace of his existence. Except for one thing. In the hurried, desperate moments of the rescue, a single leather glove had slipped from his jacket pocket, falling unnoticed into a rain-filled puddle beside the road. What Liam didn't know was that he had just saved Evelyn Sterling, the reclusive architect of a global real estate empire worth billions. And what Evelyn would never understand was why the man who had walked through fire for her had vanished without asking for a single thing in return. 2 years had passed since Chloe Reed lost her fight with a swift and merciless illness, leaving Liam to raise Maya alone in their small, mortgaged house in the quiet town of Oakhaven. The town knew their story. In a place where lives were interwoven like the roots of the ancient trees that gave the town its name, secrets were a luxury few could afford. Mrs. Gable from 2 houses down still brought over a pot roast every other Sunday, her own quiet way of checking in on the handsome widower who ran Reed and Son Auto Repair with a solitary grit that bordered on stubbornness. Liam appreciated the kindness, but he had learned to be entirely self-reliant. He had to be. Maya was always watching, her young mind a sponge for every lesson in resilience he offered, spoken or unspoken. The 2-bay garage behind their house was both his livelihood and his sanctuary. The air inside smelled of gasoline, motor oil, and the faint, metallic scent of hard work. Liam could diagnose an engine's ailment by its cough, coaxing life back into machines other mechanics had declared dead. After school, Maya would claim a corner of the workshop, her small desk littered with crayons and drawing paper. She would sketch for hours, her brow furrowed in concentration, capturing the world as she saw it. Liam noticed her drawings were always of families. Whole, complete families with a mother and a father and a little girl, the kind Maya barely remembered from before the world had tilted on its axis. Chloe's presence was a quiet hum beneath the surface of their daily lives. Her favorite mug, painted with a comical-looking robin, still sat on the highest shelf in the kitchen cabinet. The trowel and fork she'd used to tend her small garden hung clean and rust-free in the shed, waiting for hands that would never again feel the soil. The initials she had carved into the workbench one lazy afternoon, CR plus LR, were smooth to the touch, a history written in wood. Liam had taught Maya that grief wasn't a mountain to be conquered, but a stone to be carried in your pocket, its weight a constant, familiar comfort. Money was a perpetual tightrope walk. The mortgage payment, the rising cost of groceries, the looming need for a new set of tires for the truck, each was a reminder that they were always one unexpected bill away from falling. Still, he refused every offer of help, from the church's charity fund to his own parents' gentle suggestions of a loan. Pride, Chloe had called it, but she'd always said it with a soft smile that made it sound like a virtue. Now, that smile lived only in the framed photo on his nightstand, and in the way Maya's eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed, a perfect, painful inheritance. One afternoon, while trying to wrestle a particularly stubborn bolt on an old transmission, he reached for his gloves and found only one. He grumbled, searching the pockets of his jacket, the top of the workbench, the cluttered shelves. He remembered the storm, the accident, but the memory was a blur of adrenaline and flashing lights. The glove was gone. He muttered a quiet curse about losing good leather, then pulled on a cheaper spare and got back to work, not dwelling on the small, insignificant loss. But on the other side of the country, in a steel and glass tower that scraped the Manhattan sky, that small, insignificant loss sat like a holy relic. The woman Liam had pulled from the wreckage was about to make a decision that would send their two vastly different worlds on a collision course. Evelyn Sterling had acquired priceless objects her entire life, but she had never possessed anything as valuable as the mystery of a Good Samaritan who wanted nothing. The weeks following the accident were a disorienting fog for Evelyn. Board meetings felt absurd, discussions of quarterly earnings and market projections seeming utterly meaningless after having stared death in its crackling, electric face. She would sit in her penthouse office, gazing out at the city below, her thoughts drifting back to a dark, rain-swept road in a town she couldn't place on a map. She remembered the scent of rain and leather, the solid feel of a strong arm around her, the quiet authority in a voice that had cut through her terror. The oil-stained leather glove sat on her vast marble desk, protected by a small, custom-made glass box. It was out of place amongst the sleek, minimalist design of her office, a piece of raw, unfiltered reality in her curated world. During moments of crushing doubt or corporate pressure, she would lift the glass lid and touch the worn leather, her fingers tracing the faded, burned-in initials on the cuff. CR. They were a mystery within a mystery, a link to a life she couldn't comprehend. Her security team, the best in the world, had found him within a week. Liam Reed, 36 years old, widowed. Owner of Reed and Son Auto Repair in Oakhaven. One child, Maya, age 7. The file was thin, painting a portrait of a simple, honorable life. No debts beyond a mortgage, no criminal record, no digital footprint to speak of. The report included discreetly taken photographs. Liam, grease-streaked and focused, leaning over an engine. Maya, sitting on a stool, her face a mask of creative concentration. They inhabited a universe she'd only ever viewed from 30,000 feet. The plan began to form, not as a business strategy, but as a deep, inexplicable need. She couldn't just write a check. That felt like an insult, a transaction that would cheapen the purity of his act. She couldn't arrive as Evelyn Sterling, the billionaire whose face occasionally appeared in financial magazines. That name was a wall, a barrier of expectation and power that would make genuine connection impossible. She needed to understand the world that produced a man like him. To do that, she had to become someone else. Someone ordinary. She rehearsed the role in the privacy of her cavernous apartment, shedding the armor of her wealth like a snake sheds its skin. She would be Evie, a freelance graphic designer looking for a quiet place to escape the city for a few months. She bought a used car, reliable but unremarkable sedan. She packed a suitcase with clothes from a consignment shop, jeans and simple sweaters that felt alien against her skin. She rented a small, furnished cottage a few towns over from Oakhaven, a world away from her doorman building in Manhattan. The woman who emerged was a stranger even to herself. And that was the point. When Evie's rented Toyota pulled into Reed and Son Auto Repair on a bright, crisp morning, Liam was replacing the brake pads on a minivan. He glanced up, offering a professional nod. Customers were the lifeblood of his business, and he treated a sputtering sedan with the same focus as a vintage sports car. But there was something about this woman that gave him pause. An elegance in her posture that her simple clothes couldn't quite hide, a watchfulness in her eyes as they took in the organized chaos of his garage. They lingered on Maya's drawings, which were taped to the office wall, studying them with an intensity that went beyond polite interest. He wiped his greasy hands on a red shop rag and met her at the small counter. She explained that the car felt sluggish, her voice cultured and soft. She seemed almost embarrassed, as if worried he would find her complaint foolish or the repair prohibitively expensive. He quoted her his standard fee for a diagnostic and saw a flicker of genuine relief in her eyes. Most of his wealthier clients, the weekenders from the city, barely registered the cost. This woman, Evie, held her purse a little tighter. The car's issue was simple: a clogged air filter. A 10-minute fix. The bill was $42. Evie seemed genuinely surprised by how reasonable it was, a small, pleased smile touching her lips. She paid with a crisp $50 bill and told him to keep the change. While he worked, Maya had wandered out, drawn by the quiet stranger who was now admiring her artwork up close. In her bag, wrapped in a soft silk scarf, was the leather glove. Evelyn's hand hovered over it, her heart pounding. This was the moment. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she knelt to Maya's level and began asking about her drawings. Her questions were specific and insightful, not the condescending praise most adults offered. She talked about perspective, about the way Maya used color to show emotion. She saw the talent, not just the childish scribbles. When Maya shyly pointed out her favorite drawing, a family under a massive oak tree, Evie's gaze softened. "You have a gift, Maya," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Over the next few weeks, Evie became a semi-regular visitor. Her car, it seemed, was prone to a series of minor, almost comical ailments. A rattling sound that turned out to be a loose piece of trim. A headlight that needed adjusting. Each visit was an excuse, a carefully orchestrated opportunity to spend a little more time in their world. In her bag, the glove remained, a silent, heavy secret. Liam found himself looking forward to her appointments. Evie, or at least the version of her he knew, was intelligent and witty, with a curiosity about his work that felt genuine. She listened, truly listened, when he talked about the intricacies of a diesel engine or the satisfaction of bringing a dead battery back to life. But her real connection was with Maya. Evie started bringing high-quality sketch pads and charcoal pencils, claiming she was trying to get back into drawing herself, but always leaving them for Maya to use. She taught the little girl about shading and texture, about how to capture the way light fell on a subject. Under Evie's gentle guidance, Maya's art began to transform, gaining a depth and sophistication that was astonishing for a 7-year-old. Liam watched the transformation with a mixture of gratitude and a low, persistent hum of anxiety. Evie was drawing his daughter out of the shell she'd built around herself since Chloe's death. She was bringing a light back into their small, quiet house. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying, because he knew, with a certainty that ached in his bones, that people like Evie didn't stay in places like Oakhaven for long. The autumn air grew cooler, and Evie's visits settled into a comfortable rhythm. She would often arrive just as Maya was getting home from school, a coincidence that felt too perfect to be accidental. She'd help with homework, her knowledge surprisingly vast, then stay to talk while Liam finished his last job of the day. Before each visit, back in her rented cottage, Evelyn would perform a small ritual. She would unwrap the glove from its silk covering, setting it on the table beside her. She'd trace the burned-in initials, CR, with her fingertip, the worn leather a tangible link to the man she was deceiving. It was a reminder of why she was there, a penance and a prayer all in one. One afternoon, while watching Maya sketch a portrait of Liam, she almost told her. The words were on the tip of her tongue. "I have something that belonged to your father," but she stopped herself. The risk was too great. Telling the child would be a betrayal of the father. Their first shared meal was an accident. Evie's car needed a more complicated repair that kept her at the garage well past sunset. Liam, feeling a pang of guilt, offered her a ride back to her cottage, but she waved it off, saying she'd just grab a burger at the diner. It was Maya who, with the unfiltered logic of a child, declared it was silly for a friend to eat alone when her dad made the best chili in the entire county. Liam found himself extending the invitation before he could talk himself out of it, and soon they were seated around his small kitchen table, the scene feeling alarmingly, wonderfully normal. The evening passed in a comfortable blur. Evie insisted on helping with the dishes, her movements graceful even while navigating his cramped kitchen. Her eyes lingered on the photographs on the fridge, Liam and Chloe on their wedding day, a laughing Maya as a toddler. She didn't ask probing questions, but studied Chloe's face with a quiet, respectful attention. "She was beautiful," Evie said softly, her gaze meeting Liam's. "You can see how much she loved you both." It wasn't pity, it was a simple statement of fact, and it disarmed him completely. As the weeks turned into a month, then two, Liam knew he was in trouble. He was falling for Evie, for her quick mind, her gentle way with his daughter, the unexpected moments of vulnerability that peeked through her carefully composed exterior. But the feeling was shadowed by suspicion. Late at night, after Maya was asleep, he'd replay their conversations. Her past was a watercolor painting, full of soft edges and indistinct shapes. She spoke of projects and clients, but never of a company. She mentioned travel, but never specific places. She was a ghost, beautifully and brilliantly present, but with no discernible history. He sensed she was hiding something, not out of malice, but perhaps out of fear. The first real crack appeared on a cold Tuesday in November. Evie was helping Maya with a school project at the kitchen table when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her face tightened almost imperceptibly. She answered, her voice dropping to a clipped, professional tone that was completely at odds with the relaxed woman he knew. "No, the zoning variance is non-negotiable," she said, her back straightening. "Tell the board we proceed as planned or we pull the Singapore funding entirely. I'll be back Thursday to handle it personally." The call lasted less than 30 seconds. When she hung up, she saw Liam watching her from the doorway, his expression unreadable. The color drained from her face. She fumbled for an explanation, something about a difficult freelance client, a high-stakes architectural design competition. The story was smooth, plausible, but the shift in her demeanor had been too stark. The woman who had just spoken on the phone was not Evie, the graphic designer. She was someone who managed boards and billion-dollar funding. Liam didn't press. He just nodded, filing the inconsistency away with the others, a growing pile of evidence that the woman he was falling for might not be real at all. The revelation, when it came, was not a dramatic confrontation but a quiet, gut-wrenching moment of discovery. A new client, a talkative man who owned a small fleet of delivery vans, was waiting in the office while Liam worked. He picked up a copy of Fortune magazine from the coffee table, flipping through it idly. Suddenly, he let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be," he said, tapping the page. "Looks like your lady friend is a bit of a celebrity." Liam walked over, wiping his hands on a rag. The man turned the magazine around. There, on a full-page feature titled "The Titans of Tomorrow," was a photograph of Evelyn Sterling. It was Evie's face, her eyes, her smile, but she was wearing a sharply tailored suit, standing in a breathtakingly modern building that she had apparently designed. The article detailed her net worth, her global real estate firm, her reputation as a ruthless but brilliant visionary. It mentioned her reclusiveness, her recent disappearance from the public eye after a personal tragedy, the sudden death of her brother. Liam felt the air leave his lungs. Every inconsistency, every vague answer, every moment of suspicion clicked into place with sickening clarity. Evie, the gentle artist. Evelyn, the billionaire titan. The deception was so vast, so complete, it was hard to process. He felt a fool's shame, hot and sharp, followed by a cold, rising anger. Their lives, his and Maya's, had been a project, a sabbatical, a rich woman's experiment in simple living. He was quiet for the rest of the day, his movements mechanical. When Evie arrived that afternoon, her car pulling up with its usual, fictitious rattle, he met her at the door of the garage, the open magazine in his hand. He didn't have to say a word. The look on his face, the magazine held out like an indictment, was enough. Her carefully constructed world shattered. "Liam, I can explain," she started, her voice trembling. "Explain what?" He shot back, his voice low and tight with a pain that felt like a physical blow. "Explain that our lives have been your vacation? A little slice of authentic poverty to clear your head before you go back to managing your empire?" "It wasn't like that," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "It started because you saved me. You were kind, and you asked for nothing. I've never known that. I just wanted to understand." "So you lied?" His voice rose, the anger finally breaking through. "You lied to me. You lied to my daughter, for months? You watched us struggle, knowing you could buy this whole town with your pocket change, and you said nothing?" Maya, hearing the raised voices, came to the door of the house, her small face clouded with confusion and fear. She clutched her sketchbook to her chest like a shield. The sight of his daughter, caught in the crossfire of his anger and her betrayal, was the final straw. "We were fine before you came here," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh, cold whisper. "And we'll be fine after you're gone. We don't need your pity, and we don't need your lies. Just go." The words hung in the cold air. Evelyn, he couldn't even think of her as Evie anymore, looked from his stone-hard face to Maya's frightened one. She didn't try to argue further. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. She gave Maya one last, heartbroken look, then turned and walked to her car, her movements stiff and unnatural. She drove away, without looking back. That night, Liam walked through the quiet house, a stranger in his own life. Everything he looked at felt tainted by the lie. The expensive art supplies on Maya's desk. The lingering scent of Evie's perfume in the hallway. He felt the absence of the missing glove more acutely than ever, not as a lost object, but as a symbol of his own gullibility. In her rented cottage miles away, Evelyn packed her bags. On the nightstand, she'd left the leather glove. She couldn't bring herself to touch it. It was no longer a symbol of his goodness, but a monument to her own deceit. She got in her car and drove back to her real life, leaving a trail of wreckage far more profound than a crashed SUV on a rainy road. The weeks that followed were heavy with a silence that was different from the quiet grief they had known before. This was a hollow silence, filled with unspoken questions and the ghost of a person who had been both a fixture and a fiction. Liam threw himself into his work, taking on the most difficult jobs, welcoming the physical exhaustion that left no room for thought. He worked on his truck late into the night, the missing glove from the pair a constant, nagging reminder on the workbench. Its absence was a physical ache. Maya retreated into herself. She still drew, but her work had lost its newfound light. The sketches were precise, technical, but joyless. She never asked about Evie. The name was simply erased from their vocabulary, leaving a jagged hole. One evening, Liam found a new drawing left on the kitchen table. It was of the three of them, him, Maya, and Evie in the garage. But Evie's figure had been furiously scribbled over in black crayon, an angry, violent void where a person used to be. The sight broke something in him. Oak Haven, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage filled with memories he couldn't escape. He made a decision. He sold the garage to a younger mechanic from a neighboring town, packed their essential belongings into the F-150, and told Maya they were moving. A fresh start. She accepted the news with the quiet resignation of a child who had learned not to get too attached to anything. Their new life was in a nondescript city a few states away, a place of brick buildings and anonymous streets. Liam found a job as a lead mechanic at a large, busy garage. They rented a small, clean apartment above a bakery. The routine was stark and simple. Work, school, dinner, sleep. He built a new wall around himself, polite but distant. He was there to fix cars, not make friends. And then, on a Tuesday morning in early spring, the world tilted again. The call came from the school nurse. Maya had collapsed in the hallway, complaining of a sharp pain in her side. She had a high fever. By the time Liam reached the local hospital, the diagnosis was clear and terrifying. A ruptured appendix. Peritonitis. Sepsis was setting in. She needed emergency surgery immediately. The next few hours were a blur of consent forms, hushed conversations with surgeons, and the sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital. Liam sat in the surgical waiting room, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. A hospital administrator approached him gently, a folder full of financial paperwork in her hands. He had insurance, but it was basic. It wouldn't come close to covering this kind of catastrophic emergency. As she explained the costs, the numbers blurring into an insurmountable mountain of debt, Liam felt a wave of helpless, suffocating despair. He was a man who prided himself on self-reliance, and he couldn't save his own child. He was staring at a payment plan he knew he could never honor when a figure appeared in the doorway of the waiting room. It was Evelyn Sterling. She wasn't dressed as Evie. She wore simple, dark trousers and a cashmere sweater, but she carried herself with an unmistakable air of quiet authority. Her face was pale, her eyes etched with worry. She hadn't come to gloat or to pity him. She had come because she knew. She sat down beside him, leaving a careful space between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick with everything they had failed to say. Finally, she turned to him. "My foundation has a discretionary fund for medical emergencies," she said, her voice low and steady. "It's anonymous. No one needs to know where the money came from. Let me do this, Liam. Not for you, not for me. For her." After the successful surgery, as Maya slept peacefully in the recovery room, Evelyn sat with Liam in the dim light of the hospital cafeteria. He was exhausted, hollowed out, his pride shattered into a million pieces. She didn't offer excuses or platitudes. She simply reached into her handbag and pulled out a worn, oil-stained leather glove. She placed it gently in his hand. He stared at it, the feel of the familiar leather a shock against his skin. It was proof. Proof that she had kept it, protected it, all this time. Proof that the connection, however fraught with lies, had been real to her, too. "I was wrong," he said, his voice raspy. "My pride. I almost let it hurt her. Thank you." "I was the one who was wrong," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I broke your trust because I was afraid. Afraid of being seen as a bank account instead of a person. But hiding wasn't the answer." In that quiet, sterile cafeteria, surrounded by the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant, they finally had an honest conversation. They talked about fear and loneliness, about the walls they had built around their hearts. They talked about Chloe. And for the first time, Liam didn't feel like he was betraying his late wife's memory by sharing it with this complicated, broken, and beautiful woman. The glove did not go back into a drawer. When they returned to their small apartment, Liam built a simple, elegant shadow box frame for it. He hung it on the wall in the living room, right above the small table Maya had claimed as her art station. It was a silent testament, a piece of their shared history now brought into the light. Evelyn didn't disappear, but she didn't move in either. Their new reality was more complex, more fragile. She returned to New York, to her world of impossible architecture and staggering wealth, but a thread now connected her to the small apartment above a bakery. She called every evening to speak to Maya. She and Liam texted, their messages careful at first, then slowly growing into a new kind of intimacy, one built on the bedrock of absolute, painful honesty. She visited once a month. She would fly in on a Friday afternoon and stay in a hotel downtown. They would spend the weekends like a strange, patchwork family. They'd go to parks, visit museums, and cook dinner in their tiny kitchen. She never brought extravagant gifts. Instead, she brought her time, her attention, her expertise. She mentored Maya with a passion that was breathtaking, connecting her with online tutors and art programs, opening doors that Liam never knew existed. When she was there, their eyes would occasionally meet over the framed glove on the wall. A shared look would pass between them, an acknowledgement of the storm, the rescue, the lies, the forgiveness. There was no need for words. Their story was hanging right there. The final scene of their story was not a grand declaration, but a quiet moment of creation. One Sunday afternoon, Liam walked into the living room to find Maya at her table, deeply focused on a new drawing. Evelyn was sitting on the floor beside her, watching with a soft smile. On the paper, 3 figures were taking shape. A man, a woman, and a child, standing together in the open bay of a garage. They weren't holding hands, but they were close, connected by the space between them. And above them, hanging on the garage wall, was a single, perfect drawing of a leather glove. It was the heart of the picture, the anchor that held them all together. Love, Liam was learning, wasn't a destination or a fairy tale ending. It was a choice made every day. It was the choice to forgive, to trust, to show up. It was the choice to build something new and imperfectly beautiful from the wreckage of the past. As Evelyn's eyes met his from across the room, he felt a quiet sense of peace settle over him. Their ending wasn't neat, but it was hopeful. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like more than enough.